Go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 12 of Two Wise Guys. And for those of you who are new, this is a show about thoughtful discussion where we talk about everything ranging from news and politics to pop culture, sports on occasion, different things like that, even, science, technology, and conspiracy theories. And I'm your host, Dan, and on the other side of the country is my co-host, Chris.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
And it's been about a month or so since our last episode, so we apologize for the delay for anyone who actually regularly follows the show. We just have, obviously a lot going on, but man, there's been a lot of stuff that's gone on in the last few weeks. So we're gonna kind of just touch on a few things that that have happened since our last episode. Which, if you haven't seen it, it is the unscripted episode number 2, which was more or less kind of a predictions episode for the new Star Wars movie that came out, and we talked about a few other things as well. So if you're interested in going back and checking that out, go take a look at it. And but for now, we're going to probably just start off talking about some of the biggest news that I heard this week. The return of the XFL, which is what I think we talked about in the unscripted episode as well. We mentioned that Vince McMahon was wanting to bring back the XFL, which, for those of you who are younger, you may not remember, they were a competitor, sort of, kind of not really, to the NFL back in the early 2000s. I think it was 2001 that the XFL originated, and it was an interesting league. I'm not a huge sports fan in general. I'm really not a big football fan either, but it was one of those things. I remember watching the first couple of games, and because I was a big wrestling fan back in the day, and so anything that the WWF at the time, or the WWE as they are now, anything that they were doing, I was kind of interested in. So, but it was strange. It was like a weird blend between professional wrestling and professional football. Chris, do you remember much about the old XFL?
I don't, but I sort of familiarized myself with it later on, because it was just one of those sort of things where I guess it became almost like a classic in a way, like sort of a cult. It had a cult following from what I understand. And I do remember it being introduced right around the Super Bowl. I forget what year it was. It might've been 2000, right around there. But Vince McMahon being, who he was. And I remember it being just advertised as sort of being, is more, I guess, physical than the NFL and things like that. So that's sort of what I remember from their pitch back in the day. And it definitely seems like it's from the pitch that, and Dan, I'm sure you'll get into this a little bit more, but the pitch that Vince McMahon gave recently about the NFL, or XFL, UXFL, I think he's calling it, or new XFL, that's what he said, seemed like it was going to be, well, he said more, one of the words that stuck out to me was more family friendly. So he definitely seems like he's going in a different direction. And again, I'm sure you're going to comment on this, but I feel it could be in sort of like response to fans of the NFL not necessarily being happy with how events and current events are being handled with respect to that.
Yeah, and I kind of noticed that was one of the things that popped out at me too. So we're going to touch on that. One of the few things that I can really say I remember about the original XFL was the players were allowed to put whatever they want on the back of their jerseys. And there's this one guy who would run around with his jersey that read "He hate me."
Yeah, that's the one everybody remembers. John Smart. He actually played football. He actually went to the NFL after his XFL career.
Did he really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he sort of became like this return specialist because he was really good at doing kick returns. So he actually did go to the NFL after.
Well, good for him. That's awesome. Yeah, that was one of the few things I remembered. I remembered it was weird watching a football game and having my favorite wrestling ring announcers, Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler, calling the game, and having Jesse Ventura show up there. This was, I think, before he was governor of Minnesota. But it was an interesting thing. But so the highlights, if you haven't watched the press conference or any of the coverage, because tons of places have been covering the announcement of the XFL. But if you want to see it, we'll have a link in the show notes to the actual press conference. It was a video conference, so he was like in front of a green screen, and they had reporters call in, and they could ask him questions there. It was about 25 minutes long, and the things that we got out of it were that it's going to be launching again in 2020. So rather than going only having a few months or a little less than a year to get everything together and get it launched, which I think he did originally because he was partnered with NBC or CBS or something like that back in the day.
Yeah, it was NBC.
NBC. Okay, so they, he had a big corporate sponsor along with it, and so they went that route. And after the first season, the ratings just weren't there. So I'm pretty sure it was NBC who pulled the plug on it. But he's launching it again in 2020. The one of the big things that they talked about was that it's going to be a single entity, so it's not going to be co-owned by NBC or CBS or any of these other outlets. It's going to just be owned by his new company, which he started. It's called Alpha Entertainment, which is not related at all to WWE. So hopefully the shareholders for the wrestling side of things remember that, and that doesn't take a hit there. But they defined it. They said it was going to have certain elements that the NFL does not have. So they want it to be a quicker gameplay, a safer type of game. They announced that there'll be 8 teams, but haven't announced any cities yet. And like Chris said, that it's going to be more family-friendly game. So there's kind of a question about what that means. I always thought NFL football, generally speaking, was relatively family-friendly. When you don't have wardrobe malfunctions and stuff during the halftime shows. But
I think that's more. He probably brought that up more in reference to the old XFL, since it was so much more raw. I doubt he's trying to make like a draw lines between himself and the NFL in that respect for family friendly. I think it's more of a reference to the old XFL being much more raw.
That could make sense, because I know, I still follow wrestling. I've been a wrestling fan for like 23 years, 25 years, I guess. And the show now is definitely much more family friendly. We're in what's known as the PG era, so it's much more family friendly than it used to be. That's for sure. It's not like Stone Cold Steve Austin coming out and flipping the bird and drinking beers on national television. Now it's like everything's very scripted because they don't want the wrestlers going off the cuff and saying things that they shouldn't.
That's an interesting point that you bring up there, and I didn't really think about it. But what's interesting is that's sort of what wrestling used to be, much more raw and unscripted and like off the cuff, as you're saying. But the strange thing to me is, and you mentioned PG era, I feel like I see a lot of things, or I don't necessarily watch live TV, but I read the news, and there's definitely, there's plenty of things that refer to it in the news. And one thing that comes to mind is the New Year's, some of the New Year's coverage by some of the major networks, one of them being CNN. And I feel like a lot of TV these days is not very PG, even quote cable TV, where that's supposed to be very safe for anyone to watch. There's a lot of shows on cable TV that are not safe to watch. But to my point about CNN, they had one of their anchors or one of their reporters was actually surrounded by people who were smoking weed during New Year's. I think that got quite a bit of press at that point because she was wearing like the earrings that look like little weed plants. Some dude was like blowing smoke in her face. They had bongs there. They were like showing off, and she had like a gas mask thing going with like the whole 9 yards. And she was definitely, feeling some of that stuff. And this is on CNN, and a lot of parents took to Twitter and took to social media to sort of complain, because this is they had to turn the coverage off or change the channel, because who wants to watch their kid or have their kid watching something like that? So the point that it's just interesting to me to see the dichotomy of okay, the XFL now wants to be more family friendly, but then we see a lot of other maybe standard TV that's not going that direction. It seems to be going in the opposite direction.
Yeah. I remember hearing about that. I didn't actually see it myself. I just remember hearing about it and thinking, like, I don't know, like they just wanted to finish the year on a high note or something. Did you get it?
Yes, I did. Pun intended.
All right. Enough of the bad dad jokes. But back to the XFL, they're wanting to make it a more customized viewing experience. I don't know what exactly that means. He mentioned possibly having a streaming service as well as network partners So, I might air on like Fox or something, and then also be able to stream it online. Um, and another thing that stood out to me that I thought was interesting was, and this maybe touches back to the PG era kind of idea, is that they want to focus on the quality of the player as well as the quality of the human being behind the player. So not just how good are you on the field, but how good of a person are you? Like, they're not going to have players there who have criminal records, who are getting DUIs, or who are domestic violence stuff, are not going to be welcome in the XFL, which I think is a positive. Um,
That's
I'm not
interesting
sure.
to me because and that's not necessarily the image that the XFL had back in the day, but that's really interesting to see. It's almost like a paradigm shift for him because the same guy's starting it, and he's basically going in the opposite direction from what you're saying of what the original XFL was, because it was intended to be more violent, to be more provocative, to be, very raw. And then now from what you're saying and what he's saying it definitely seems like they're really trying to compete with the NFL on different lines. So it'll be interesting to see that play out.
Yeah, and I mean, and honestly, it's kind of interesting. And if you look at the original XFL, it really kind of pulls at where the culture was. Like the late '90s, the mid to late '90s into the early 2000s, wrestling was huge. I'm sure that you've probably seen, back in the day, you saw people walking around with, Steve Austin T-shirts on and
Oh
stuff like
yeah.
that.
Oh yeah. My
And
teachers, some of my high school teachers had posters of full life size posters of Stone Cold Steve Austin. I'm not kidding, in their classrooms. So yeah, I get that.
well, I mean, and it was cool because, like, as a kid who grew up watching professional wrestling, I remember, you know, my friends and I, we liked it, and we were little kids and stuff. And then as we started getting older, people started picking on us and making fun of us about liking wrestling. And then all of a sudden, what was known as the Attitude Era kicked in, and you know, wrestling was cool, and like everyone was into it. And The Rock was on Saturday Night Live and in movies and stuff like that. And that was a great time to be a wrestling fan because people didn't make fun of you anymore. And that's what, in the old days, it was really cheesy. Like there was lots of really silly gimmicks and stuff. And then it was seen as a very family oriented, activity. You go take the kids, take the grandkids, and go see the local wrestling show. And then once the Attitude Era kicked in with Austin and The Rock and everyone, that's when it really started getting intense. And part of that had to do with the rivalry that McMahon had with Ted Turner at the time, because they were kind of big time competitors. And so they kept upping the ante to make it more, to get more viewership. And that is kind of what took it into that level of, being very provocative and much more violent. You went from having, um, you went from having matches where, you might see like a clown put a pie in the face of somebody else, just as a silly gimmick thing, to all of a sudden like an inferno match where the goal is to set your opponent on fire. It was really in a big paradigm shift. Wrestling is stupid. It's
Yeah,
okay.
the pyrotechnics really kicked in too, didn't they?
Yeah, and then you saw that in the early XFL, and so you had, I remember watching it. I think it was the debut game of the XFL back in 2001, and it had a pyro show like at the beginning of it, much like they had on Monday Night Raw, and then all of a sudden McMahon comes out and starts talking. But one of the things he talked about in this is that he's going to not be at the forefront of it this time. So it seems like it's not necessarily trying to capitalize on the popularity of pro wrestling. It seems like this is more of a passion project for him now, and he's trying to see it through, and he's taking more professional measures towards it rather than provocative measures, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. And to me, from what you're saying and what he's said during that conference, I really it shows me that he really is truly trying to compete with the NFL. I think he sort of smells blood in the water, in a way that, I mean, there's no doubt that the NFL's numbers are down. Every week, there's plenty of news articles that talk about the viewership for games, even for big time games, between good teams, teams that are popular. There's certain teams that definitely are more popular than others. But in fact, I saw an article last weekend, were the conference championships for the NFL. So that means the last 4 teams standing before the Super Bowl, before they cut it to 2, play. So those should be the best games of the year, basically, other than the Super Bowl. and viewership was down 8% versus last year.
Wow.
So again, we're talking big games, big time games, same league, same everything, but the viewership is down. So I think McMahon senses that, people are starting to look at the NFL, and I've had friends call it this, the no fun league, NFL, no fun league. And that's how fans are starting to look at it as, there's a lot of the fun has been taken out of it. And, one of the contributing factors could be some of the political things that have happened in the last couple of years, with players protesting. But I think there's other things too, just in the quality of the game. You said you don't watch football or sports that much, but I'm sure you're familiar with instant replay. And it's been around for a while now. And in fact, instant replays in the NBA, it's in the MLB. I think it's even hockey now. So they can do instant replay to just go back over these plays where it's like, okay, maybe the call on the field was not the correct call. But what it does is, okay, so we're making things more fair and whatnot, and you're checking things. And a lot of times we could see that, we can get a call correct, but it's slowing the game down. It's taking the fun out of it. It's just becoming so technical because you got people looking at like a dude who's catching this ball in super slow motion, and did the ball move in his hands, and did it do this? And it's like, okay, great. So now every great play is going to be looked at under a microscope, and we have to put up with this on a weekly basis for every game. So I think there's a lot of other contributing factors to that too, not just the political, social climate. So maybe what McMahon's trying to do is sort of counteract that and get back to sort of the roots of what football really is, which is intended to be a family sport, intended to, bring people together and not necessarily divide people.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things he talked about as far as the time goes. As far as I understand, an average game, like an average NFL game, is usually like 3.5 hours or so, 3.5, 4 hours, something like that.
Definitely not 4 hours. I think a long game would probably be along the lines of about 3.5 hours. If it's unusual, I think, unless it's like an overtime game, or just like a really low scoring game where there's a lot of like possession changes for it to go over 3 hours. But something like the Super Bowl and the playoff games, those do go a little bit longer. So those would be more along those lines.
Okay. Yeah, he mentioned that their goal to make the game quicker is to take out some of those things, like maybe removing a halftime, so that way they can try and get the game time down to about 2 hours, rather than having it be like a 3-hour investment of your time. And I think that he did mention the politics aspect of it, that there will be absolutely no politics or social justice issues, being brought up on the field. Is going to be about football, and which I think is interesting, because I think it was the same day or the day after that McMahon announced this. The NFL apparently announced that there's going to be starting some sort of an owner-player social justice committee, whatever that is.
Yeah. So that's a big deal too. They're trying to sort of iron out the wrinkles and stuff, I think, in the NFL side. Just back to your last point about the length of the game. I just looked it up on Google here. And there's a site, QZ.com. It says the average NFL professional football game is 3 hours and 12 minutes. But they're saying here that if you tally up the time when the ball is actually in play, the action amounts to a mere 11 minutes. And that's kind of what football is. It's like kind of like baseball, where it's a little more quick, fast paced than baseball, but you have like a little bit of dullness between the plays, and then you got the action play, and then you sit. So it's like go rest. So, so it's not necessarily the bet. If you're looking for continuous action, you might want to watch soccer, basketball, hockey, something along those lines, not baseball or football.
Yeah, I mean, baseball, even though, doesn't seem like it's that bad as far as, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it'd be worth looking up.
Have you watched the baseball game on TV recently?
No, not TV. I don't watch them. I don't have a TV to watch them on. So like we have a single A team here in town that I'll go to games occasionally, and maybe it is. Maybe it is that long.
It's better when you're there, I think. At a baseball game, it's one of those sports I feel like is better viewed in person than it is on TV.
Yeah, I would say that's probably true too, because you don't have to worry. Like, it's one thing if you're watching on TV and having to listen to the commentators, go on about stuff, and then it's cut into different things, and it's just, I don't know, it's just not as much of a fun experience as it is like if you go and watch a game in person, which maybe that's a strange thing, but it's like, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it's that long, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. And to the point of game length, or McMahon actually brought up during his conference, that they are going to listen to the fans first of all, as far as like what fans think is would make the game better. But in addition to that, he mentioned possibly fewer commercial breaks. I feel like some of the stuff he said is like, and talking about no player protest is like easy to say at this point in time. Let's have fewer commercials. Let's have no player protest. That's not going to be allowed. But when you get down to it, it's like you really don't have control over that. Like, I mean, short of telling players, hey, if you do this, you're going to be like booted out of the league. I mean, I guess he could do that, but it just would. I feel like in this political climate and just the way the country is right now, that would just come off pretty authoritarian, and people are very, I feel they're very sensitive to that right now.
I think they are, and actually one of the reporters that were on the line with them brought that point up, and I think the guy's name was John Lafayette. I can't remember what publication he was from, but he asked the question about, not allowing protests, not allowing social justice things, and phrased it as, will there be no free speech? And which I think that itself speaks to the misnomer about what free speech is, what constitutes free speech. And you know me, I'm a constitutional libertarian. I think you should let people say and do what they want. But in all fairness, that protection is with the government, and it's that the government can't come and say to Colin Kaepernick, you can't take a knee on the field. You must stand for the national anthem. Whereas, Alpha Entertainment and the XFL, if they lay that out in the rules, it's in the contract. The player signs off on the contract. That's the player signing off saying, I agree to the rules and regulations that are laid forth in this contract, one of which, for example, maybe we as a unit stand during the national anthem. And if they violate that, then they can be subject to fines or whatever. And that's not authoritarian. That's abiding by the rules and by which you signed to, if that makes sense.
Right. No, and that does make sense. I'm not saying that it's authoritarian. I'm saying it could be perceived that way. And I totally agree with you. Go ahead.
I'm sure that it will be. I'm sure that it will be, seen as that, because people just insist on getting upset about everything. And I think we actually talked about it in a previous episode.
Yeah.
The culture.
And I feel like, well, to that point, I think, no, it's not authoritarian. It's a private corporation that, as employees, is allowed to direct you as they see fit. The problem with that is that a lot of corporations are changing the way that they approach that. Prominently, corporations such as Google, who have these education, I forget the term that they use for it, but it's like basically social education or something like that, and it's meant to educate people on how to sort of interact with each other when they're different races, colors, creeds, sexes, and everything like that. So I think that's the trouble that's going to run into. Not necessarily that this is the letter of the law, a corporation can do it at once, but hey, this is the way other corporations are starting to handle things. We have to follow their lead because this is how things are perceived. Now, to piggyback on that right there, though, we have a situation where Twitter is basically going around and deleting or suspending permanently people's accounts who violate their terms of use in terms of service. But a lot of those people, I'm not going to get too much into it, but a lot of those people are very upset because they don't see any problem with what they're doing. They're not attacking anybody personally. They're not doing anything lawfully wrong, but it's up to Twitter as a private corporation to decide who they want to allow on their platform, which is bothersome because it seems that the people who are sort of directing the social or calling the shots with what's acceptable in society want to have their cake and eat it too, right? So we have this corporation, Twitter's shutting people's accounts down that are saying things that, they say is not good. But then we have, we have corporations like Google who are saying, okay, we need to get educated on this stuff and you need to learn, because everybody's obviously, prejudiced in this day and age and bigots if they don't agree with everything that's said.
Right. But I mean, I also feel like that's their right as a company to say that, even though I don't, if they shut my account down for whatever reason because of all the controversial things that I say on there, which I don't, but if they felt like something I said was like that, then I think should have every right to do so. But I think as a community,
Absolutely.
then people need to take responsibility and ownership of that and say, I really don't like what you're doing. I'm not going to use your service anymore. But it's I don't know. It's kind of one of those. Um, it's kind of one of those give and take kind of things. You can't say that you're an advocate for free speech and then restrict that speech at the same time. You know, without having to make sacrifices. So if you're upset with the fact that Twitter is shutting down your people's Twitter accounts, then maybe people who are currently on there need to make a statement about it and get off of it. I'm sure that there are other outlets out there that are just smaller than not as well known. Like I haven't been on Facebook in months because it's a terrible, awful place, and honestly, it just wastes a bunch of my time. But I mean, I still have my account because I keep in touch with family there, so I go on usually about once a month and check up on things. And honestly, I haven't been on Twitter very often either. Though I just found out that apparently I'm followed by the man Ken Shamrock himself, which is pretty fantastic. I know, right? It's super exciting. But anyways,
That's incredible. Ken Shamrock. How did you pull that off?
I don't know. I didn't even realize it until like about a month ago, and I was like, "Wait, is that really?" I went to his page, and it was the real Ken Shamrock, and I got super excited. For anyone who's not aware, Ken Shamrock was a former UFC champion. He was in WWF when I was a kid, and so he was one of my favorite Intercontinental champions. And the dude's awesome, but he's known as the world's most dangerous man. He's a really cool guy. But I don't know. I've been kind of looking for a way, and this goes beyond Twitter even, but like Google does the same kind of stuff. Like the more I hear about Google as a corporate entity and the way that they treat their employees and their employees' right to they try to speak out about the way that the culture of Google as a company is, and they get fired. We all remember that memo that came out that I can't remember what it said, but it was a very controversial memo that came out. And so
yeah, I just sent you the link.
Did it? Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll throw that in the show notes too.
It was James Damore, I believe. He was a Google engineer.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right. Okay, yeah, that's the guy. But it says on here, he talks about Google's diversity or diverse culture or whatever. And how he had a divergent opinion from that which the company wanted him to have, and as a result of it, he was silenced and then ultimately fired because of it. And there's been other Google employees who've come out saying the same things, and I've heard other Google engineers, Google employees who've come out saying basically that if you hold these, you tend to be conservative values. That if you tend to hold these conservative values, they don't even want you there. They don't want anything to do with you. And as somebody who is a libertarian who does have more conservative values, that kind of pisses me off a little bit. Like I don't want to support a company that's going to be like that and treat people like that, especially not a company whose motto is to, to not be evil. And
yeah.
So I don't know. I just think it bothers me. Sorry, my autoplay kicked in again, so I had to close that out.
I think I to your point, I totally agree with you. But I think corporations really want, like what you're saying is very true, and they want people to be very accepting of each other, but it's sort of like this unspoken thing in a lot of companies, and Google has just sort of taken it to the next level with these diversity training that they do. And it's more like if you hold certain conservative viewpoints, you feel like you almost need to just shut up and keep your mouth shut, keep your head down and not say anything, and I think for most people, that's probably fine. I mean, you want to get there and you want to make some money, and nobody's going to say anything to you. Nobody's going to say anything. But what happens is when you do something like this, James Damore did, which is publicly write something, and you work for a large company, people are going to find it, quickly. And I feel like though he does have the right to free speech and he could say what he wants, Google has every right to fire him, to drop, because of his viewpoints. and it's just sucks because yes, Google has that right, but then it's almost like there's this double standard. It's only certain viewpoints that are divergent from what sort of, is the, I don't know, the taste of the day, I guess, or taste of the week. And it's always fluctuating, there's always like little addendums being added onto it. It's like Animal Farm, right? So in Animal Farm, for those of you who have read this book by, my mind just went blank, but
George Orwell.
Yeah, George Orwell. Gee, what a time to go blank. In that book, they keep on updating sort of the Constitution, writing the animal Constitution, so to speak, where they keep changing things in order to make it more convenient for certain people, to the end where you have the horse, the Clydesdale horse, who's basically the MVP there, does everything he's told, model citizen, and he ends up getting, killed and sent off to the glue factory by his own, brethren animals. And he's expendable because, he no longer fits into their plans. And I hate to say it, but I feel like that's where, George Orwell really hit the nail on the head with that. That's where we're headed. And we're, in fact, in a lot of ways already there as a society.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what it feels like. And, going back to this idea of companies and regulating, Twitter a few years ago, they referred to themselves, I believe it was as the free speech wing, or what was it? I can't remember what they called themselves. It was something along the lines of the free speech advocates of the free speech wing or something like that. And, just a few months, I think it was even last month in mid-December, one of their executives said that it's no longer possible for them to stand up for all free speech. And that change is really sad as a platform, which is kind of, it makes you, if you value that, it makes you think, well, maybe I need to find a better outlet to be part of that. And while you were talking, I was looking it up because I remember hearing about one that was very, liberty oriented, free speech oriented. And I just found it, so I'll throw it in the show notes for anyone who's interested. The site for it is similar to Twitter. It's called gab.ai or IA, something like that. I'll throw it in the show notes for anyone who's interested. But it is a free speech social media alternative to Facebook and Twitter. So it looks pretty cool. I'll probably give it a check it out and see what it's like. But it seems like it's a pretty cool outlet. It seems to function a lot the same way. And, with like places like Google, who are becoming more and more antithetical to at least my personal values, I've been looking at ways to get off of the platform as much as I can. Simple things like switching from Google search to DuckDuckGo. I don't really like Bing or any of the other ones. So, rather than going through Gmail, I'm switching over to Proton Mail. Just rather than using, which I never really use Google Docs anyways, but rather than using Google Docs, using LibreOffice, which is an open source office suite, things like that. So, I mean, it's the idea where companies are doing things that we don't like and people are protesting about it, but it's like, you got to at some point stop complaining about it and actually start taking the initiative to find alternatives to those services. And that's one of the reasons why I actually am kind of excited about this idea of the XFL taking off. And it's not going to be in direct competition to the NFL or anything like that. And even if they were, they wouldn't be able to compete anyways, because the NFL is just so big and established. But, give it, if it lasts, more than a couple of seasons, give it, 4 or 5, 10 years and see where it is. And maybe it will end up becoming that, or maybe it'll help the NFL to see that the way they've been behaving and the things that they've been, subjecting their fans to, that's really been upsetting their fans, is not worth them losing their fan base and their business from, if that makes sense. It's the idea. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's beneficial to a lot of people to have something like the XFL, if it really is able to sort of thrive on its own, take off and get wings, because it's going to provide jobs for people. It's going to be an outlet for athletic creativity, for players who, miss the chance to be able to get in on an NFL team or an NFL practice squad, to be able to play on an actual team and possibly even start games. So I think it's a really great thing. And I think the original XFL was really great for that, because it's something that, in fact, a number of XFL players became NFL players after the XFL was over. One of the quarterbacks, I think for the I forget which team it was. Tommy Maddox ended up playing football. He ended up playing NFL football for, I believe, a couple teams. So he came back to the NFL, and he was a pretty successful quarterback when he went into the NFL from the XFL. So from that perspective, I think it's a really great thing. Competition always breeds like creativity, and it breeds, to strive for more greatness, not only in the people, but also in the organizations themselves. So I think both the NFL and the XFL can benefit from this sort of like duality of a relationship, and it'll again give great opportunities to players who wouldn't normally be able to get involved with it.
Yeah, I agree. For the sake of time, let's keep it moving. And if you haven't already checked it out, I would invite you to pause this episode and go check out the last episode of Unscripted, where we went through our final predictions for the new Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi, which I know it's been out forever now, but we're busy, so here we are now. But we kind of wanted to retouch on that and go back over some of the things that we took away from the movie once you've seen it, right, Chris?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay, good. So we finally got around to going to see it, and we thought maybe we could talk about it. And I think we've passed the statute of limitations as far as spoiler alerts go, since it's going on like
been out for more than a month. Yeah, if you haven't watched it by now, you're not a real Star Wars fan.
That's fair. We'll try to keep the spoilers to a minimum, but if you don't want to hear any of this, maybe fast forward 10 15 minutes, and I'll put timestamps in the show notes so you can get past it as well if you want. But I, for one, I know there was a lot of controversy with it. A lot of people seem to not like it too much. I thought it was great. I thought it was a great movie. I really enjoyed it. It was much different than I thought it was going to be. And I went back through our predictions from the last episode, and it seems like I think I'm the only one who got one right. And one of it was that I don't have it in front of me right now. Here it is. Nope. Okay. Well, no, actually, I did have one right. My prediction was that this movie would not explain the origin of Rey's parents. So that's the one I got right.
Did.
No, it didn't.
You don't think it did?
No, I don't think so.
But Kylo Ren right at the end was like, your parents were nobody. They were junkers.
Well, we don't know if he was telling the truth. He's on the dark side. They lie. Until they actually give us clear, definitive evidence, we do not have an explanation of who Rey's parents are.
Okay, Dan. She went down into a force cave and saw herself. I was kind of perplexed by that at first, and I was like, what does this mean? I think that it's just, it just kind of is what it is. Her parents are nobody. And I think that's the point of it. I think that, I feel like the director, and they were intentionally trying to throw just everybody off the trail.
Yeah.
Everybody, like the Star Wars, like the true Star Wars fans that are like, let's give them something that they're never going to expect, because that's just what makes movies great, is unexpected stuff. And I think they tried to do that too much. It was like over the top. Like, okay, great, she's nobody. I think that's great. That has a great message in and of itself, because the message is anybody can be great. I think that's wonderful. But if it's done for the sake of, okay, let's try and throw people off, I don't like it.
Yeah, that's fair. I think as far as I can really remember your predictions from the last episode, you had said that Rey is a Skywalker. We didn't really get a clear answer to that in any one direction or another. You also said that she was potentially, if I got this correctly, Luke's half-sister, maybe?
Yeah, you know what? I vaguely remember bringing that up. Yeah, that she could have been possibly Darth Vader's like surrogate, or had a surrogate. The whole like, and then they had a kid with his his genetics, basically.
Right. Yeah.
I guess that's still on the table, possibly, but
yeah, I think it's still on the table. I mean, we don't really know for sure. And that you also said that it would leave a suspenseful cliffhanger similar to The Empire Strikes Back. Which I don't know. I don't necessarily think that it did. It wasn't really a cliffhanger. It was more of a, set up for the final sequel.
And in a lot of ways, I feel like that's where the movie disappointed me the most, because I'm like, okay, like you watch a great second film like Empire, and you really do have this question of like, he says, Luke, I'm your father, and you don't, and you're kind of like doubting it. I don't know. Maybe now that I'm like processing it right here, maybe that's what they're doing. So we have a dark sider. We have Kylo Ren revealing a fact or an apparent fact about the protagonist's origins, and we're kind of left thinking like, should we believe this or should we not? So in a way, it's mirroring that at the end of the film.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's a clip that could be a cliffhanger if we don't take Kylo's word for it. So we still don't know who her parents are. Yeah. Okay. I agree with you on that. We don't know who her parents are.
All right. So Dan wins. Gotcha. Let's see. My three predictions I had on this one were that Rey is the chosen one. I think that's still on the table. It didn't really give a clear indication, I mean, obviously the Force is strong with her. The lightsaber chose her. But it didn't really go too deep into that. We already talked about, the movie in the explanation of her parents and her origin. The final prediction I had was that Rey would join with Kylo Ren and fall to the dark side. So I was completely off.
You were way off.
I was way off. Oh,
you were way off, dude. But I never believed that for a second. And you know what? The interesting thing is my wife ended up coming to a similar conclusion as you. So you're not the only one.
Okay.
Before the movie came out, she said she felt like that was what was going to happen. And you know what I think did that to a lot of people was the trailer. They purposely, really the way that they shot the trailer and intercut the scenes made it seem like she was having like this big crisis of like, should I be dark? Should I go over there and tempted? When in reality, she was never tempted at all. She was just like she was very steadfast, which to her credit, that's really cool.
Yeah, I thought it was really well done. I got to admit, there was that moment in the middle of the movie when she's brought before Snoke, where I was like, kind of questioning what was going on, and then, again, spoiler alert for anyone who doesn't want to hear it, Kylo turns the lightsaber on Snoke and actually kills him, and then they have that epic battle with the Royal Guards there. That was probably my favorite scene of the movie, or second favorite. My favorite was the cruiser destroying the Star Destroyer, but that was another thing entirely. But I don't know. I thought it was really, really well done. I really liked how they utilized Luke's character. Obviously, he's an older man now, so he can't necessarily do the more physically active stuff that he would have done it if it was immediately following Return of the Jedi. But I think they utilized his character very well, and I definitely didn't see it coming the way they finished it off. So, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I have to agree with you about that scene with the Royal Guards. That was very, very cool, very unexpected. I think that's part of what made it so cool. Is you're kind of like reeling from what just happened. Like Snoke just got off with a lightsaber that was just sitting there, and you're like, whoa! And then all of a sudden they're like fighting these guards that all have swords too, and that was really cool. I think that's probably one of my favorites as well. Just overall, my general feeling for the movie was a feeling of disappointment, to be honest with you. I feel like the other two Star Wars movies that have recently come out, Force Awakens and the other one,
the one that shall not be named.
The one that shall not be named. I actually think those were both better, to be honest with you. I think they were both better than this film. I think J.J. Abrams did a much better job with Force Awakens. It felt really Star Wars. This film felt Star Wars and plus some other things. And I'm just being chauvinistic here, because I'm a guy, but it almost felt like the filmmakers were trying to like teach us a lesson, like, and a lot of times, and I think I forget who I talked to about this, but a lot of times when you're watching a film, you actually know more than the main characters do. Actually are figuring things out, and that's intentional. Good filmmaking is supposed to like give you like these little clues, and if you're paying attention, you can figure these things out and sort of just be just a step ahead of the action and figure things out. And other times, you're trying to just catch up and you're right there with it. But in the case of this film, the way that it was shot, the way that the story was portrayed in certain cases, I felt as a viewer behind everything. I'm like, whoa, where's everything going? And it's not because I couldn't figure the story out. It's because they were constantly trying to teach us lessons. Like we have in the very beginning, we have what's his name? Dak, or what was his name again?
Which one?
The pilot.
Oh, oh crap, I can't remember now.
I'm just dropping balls all over the place here, but anyway, the pilot, he's sitting there and his fighter pilot is about to attack the Star Destroyers, and he does the heroic thing, but and the mission is a success, but then people die, of course, just like in any battle. But then when he gets back, he gets reprimanded by not just Leia, but this other chick, purple-haired chick, who, you have no clue who she is. And it's like he's being like slapped on the hand. And it's just like, you're a bad boy. Even though the mission was successful, look what happened. All these people died. They didn't have to. And it wasn't that big of a deal. And then they do it to you later in the film too. And it's like, wait a minute. I thought we just won a battle. I thought this was good. And you're saying like, no, this is not good. And then later on, I believe when Leia is like unconscious and all kinds of stuff, and again, the pilot, he does what he believes is the right thing, and he's just trying to, stand up for what he believes is right. And then he gets slapped on the hand again by this purple-haired chick and Leia, and they're like, look, you need to like stop trying to be heroic. You can't do this. You can't always make these moves. And there's other ways of doing things. And by the end of the film, when we get to the very final scene, he gets it. He gets what they're trying to do, and he's like, okay, I can play ball with this. And he changes his plan from what he was trying to do. And instead of like charging right up into the face of the action and being the hero, he changes his plan. And then, they sort of like give him the proverbial high five at the end when everything's successful. And they're like, see, you learned. And as a viewer, I'm just like, what did I just go through? Like, I feel like they were trying to teach me a lesson, and, and it's dumb to try to be heroic or try to do, what you believe is right. I don't know if that's how you felt about things, but that whole overarching storyline really left a bad taste in my mouth, to be honest with you. It made it difficult for me to sort of enjoy the whole film, because I'm like, oh gosh, I'm just not a bad person for not knowing the right way to do things.
Honestly, I like that character a lot. I'm trying to remember his name. It's going to really bother me if I can't figure this out, but I will get it later, I'm sure. But he's one of those characters that I think, I don't know, I've always related to the pilots in the Star Wars movies. Like as a kid, I liked Luke Skywalker when he was a pilot. Didn't really care that much when he became a Jedi. Was a big fan of Wedge Antilles in the movie and in the books and in the games and everything. But that's probably one of the reasons why I like his character so much. And I didn't see it so much as the director preaching at the audience so much as it was showing him having to undergo a lesson in humility as, furthering his character development. It struck me as this was the movie where they were taking these characters who were essentially kids in the first movie. Like you had, you had Rey, who had very little life experience, outside of, scavenging on Jakku. And then you had Finn, who, was, fresh out of the training regiment from the First Order. And then you had the pilot, which I still can't remember his name. It's really bothering me. He was this hotshot pilot who had this natural skill and natural gift and was able to do things that no other pilot could. And so that they all were able to fly through the first movie and succeed in their missions and do the things that they needed to do with the help of, the veterans like Han Solo and Chewbacca. But they were ultimately able to carry themselves through based on their own skill, their own natural abilities. Whereas this one, they're having to start learning hard lessons and having to start learning, they need to start growing up. It's kind of like the adolescent years. And I feel like the next movie, because for instance, in this one, turning away from the pilot, you see that with Rey. You see that with her having to wrestle with the dark side, having to wrestle with her connection to Kylo Ren. You have to see it with her, dealing with Luke Skywalker on whatever planet they were on. And with Finn, I thought is where you said it the most, where he goes from, the same coward that you saw in the first one, where he's trying to run away, to You saw a glimpse of it at the end of The Force Awakens, where he goes to Starkiller Base to rescue Rey, and he basically is about to compromise the entire Resistance in order just to try and save her because he cares for her. And in this one, you see him trying to run away again for the same reason, to protect Rey. But in the end, he's going toe to toe with Captain Phasma, and he's showing great heroism, and he's ready to, go on a suicide mission to protect the Resistance. And it's showing that development that's building there, so that when I believe what's going to happen is when Episode 9 comes out, you're going to see the culmination of it, where this next generation of rebel leaders is there to take the place of the former heroes that are dying off in these movies. Because, Han Solo died off in the first one. Luke obviously, became one with the Force and died in this one. And I honestly thought Leia should have died in this one. That whole, going out into space and then, using the Force to bring herself back was weird.
I think they wanted to show how powerful she is, because she's never used the Force in any of the other films, although she's sort of Force sensitive.
Right, and I'm cool with that. I thought it was cool that they indicated that, because as someone who grew up reading the books and playing the games and stuff, I knew that she was Force sensitive, and in one of the books, she was actually trained as a Dark Jedi by Palpatine, I think it was. So that was the thing I thought was pretty cool. But I thought, with Carrie Fisher actually passing away, I thought it would have been good to go ahead and just kill the character off and let that be the end of it.
They already finished filming. They were in post-production when she passed away, so it was kind of like, well, here's our story. And maybe they'll do that early on in the next film. Who knows? But Poe Dameron, that's the guy's name. That's the pilot's name.
Thank you.
Okay. And I get where you're coming from. They're learning lessons. But here's another tidbit of, and I don't know if you caught this, and this is just a fact of something that I caught. It's not necessarily like I'm saying there's anything bad about it, but we have... as far as the good guys are concerned, the rebels are concerned. I'm thinking World War II here. We have our leadership is all women, right? So the good guys, all the leaders are women, all the people in power who control, sort of pull the strings are women. And we have the guys who are playing sort of like second fiddle in these films. We got the Finn, he's playing second fiddle. We've got Poe, he's playing second fiddle. And then we have, Benicio del Toro. He's like this kind of guy. He's like bad guy, seems kind of good. And then you got Mark Hamill, who also is playing second fiddle, to be honest with you. He essentially is, and then on the other side, we have all men in the Knights of Ren on the evil side. It's all men, no women. There's, I think, what is it? Captain Phasma is the only woman, and she wears a mask the whole time. So it's like, okay. But, and again, I'm just bringing up facts here. I'm not trying to make a point of okay, they're, I'm not trying to be chauvinistic here or anything like that. But okay, so we have that, and then all the women in positions of power, and they are the ones that are teaching the men lessons. If you even look at the relationship between Rey and Luke, she doesn't really learn anything from him. I don't know if you caught that. She learns almost nothing from him. He's the Jedi Master. Although he's cut himself off from the Force. She's so powerful already. She is able to see through a lot of this stuff, even though she's very raw and untrained. She literally, I challenge you, go rewatch it. She learns nothing from Luke. And in fact, Luke is the one who sort of learns something and decides he's, instead of not helping, he's going to go help at the end of the film. So he's got his mind changed. And in the same case, we have, Princess Leia and this admiral who they hold all the cards and they're not telling anybody this information. And then at the right time, they let them know, because, what would they do with all that information? What would Poe Dameron do if he knew everything? So he's in the dark. So of course he's going to make the wrong decision. And then, so you have Finn deciding to leave too. And they put him in his place with this other chick, the Rose or whatever her name is. Mm-hmm. She basically is going to put him in jail. He's about to leave. She thinks he's deserting when he's trying to go, make things right. And they end up going on this whole journey where they find the slicer guy, Benicio del Toro. And, that whole thing ends up becoming basically useless because they didn't have to do it. And then at the end, it's like Princess Leia's see, I told you so. We knew the whole thing was going to be fine. And you didn't have to do any of this crap in the first place. And that's sort of where I'm coming from, where it's like, okay, we have these valuable lessons to learn. and we must be taught because we don't know anything. And when you have the Jedi Master that, basically saved the galaxy from the first film, basically becoming a 2-bit character who kind of saves the day at the end, I guess, he wasn't really willing to do it, and he doesn't really get to teach anything before he dies to his Padawan. I kind of have a problem with that, because that is completely breaking with the way that Star Wars is built. And that's what they were really trying to do, because if you listen to the dialogue throughout the film, it's like, okay, things aren't as they used to be, things are changing, it's a wider world, we need to have our gaze widened so we can see the whole picture and understand, and it's basically, for lack of a better word, it's sort of hinting at what culture is today. It's just basically like, okay, how do we socially interact and fit that into the Star Wars universe and train people? And that's why I feel like the audience is being trained,
Mm-hmm. To be honest, I feel like you're reading a little too much into it. I mean, as a Star Wars fan who watched it, I guess I can see where you're coming from, and I can see where you would get that. And maybe that is something they put in there intentionally to be like a subliminal kind of messaging or something. I don't know. But, I mean, Luke's mind wasn't changed by Rey. It wasn't changed by Leia. It wasn't changed by any of the, their female, authority figures in the movie.
I didn't say she changed his mind. I'm saying he didn't teach her anything.
Right. But you mentioned that, I think you had said that, she taught him something, or she trained, something like that. She changed his mind or something like that. And it was Yoda who changed his mind about, he was going to go destroy.
Well, I mean, that's one point. That's one point.
Right. Right. I'm just saying.
It's just one point. Maybe I said that. I don't remember, but
it's okay.
That's not what I intended.
That wasn't the main point.
Yoda definitely changed his mind for sure when he burned all those books.
Yeah, that was cool, by the way.
That was cool.
That was cool.
But okay, to that, but which that brings up more of my point about let's teach people. Yoda goes like, did you even read these books? Did you even do this stuff? And it's like, we're chucking all the Jedi teachings out, everything that's been held sacred and all these things. And we're like, and we're burning it, and it's all gone, up in smoke, gone. That everything from the Jedi from the past is gone. So whatever is moving from that point on forward is new, because Luke is dead. All the old Jedis are dead. All we got is this one Jedi, not even Jedi, Rey, who's not trained, who's the future of the Order, and that's it. So it's like what they're saying is like all of what we believed in before was essentially garbage and wrong. We need to start over again. That's what the film is doing.
Right.
I'm not reading into it. That's what it's doing. Like, you can, like, from a script standpoint, we're having a new beginning. All the old stuff is dying.
Yes and no. I agree and I disagree. And here's why I disagree. I don't know if you caught it, but in the final scene when they're escaping from that salty planet, whatever that was, and they're loading the remaining Resistance fighters onto the Millennium Falcon, there's a clip. They show it very briefly. It's only for a matter of seconds, and Rey has those books. She has them with her. She had taken all the books and had put them in a bag, and she took them away on the Millennium Falcon with her. So,
are you sure? How do you know those were the books?
Because they were the same exact books that Luke had showed her inside that giant tree thing.
Okay, so it was some books, not necessarily all the books, but it was some books.
Okay, fair. But the point is that Yoda, who is one with the Force in the movie, is at a point where he knows what, he would have known that she'd taken the books away. And so him doing that was to teach Luke a lesson. It wasn't, he knew that the books weren't in there. Not necessarily. I don't necessarily think that he would have done that if those things were in there. Now, if they were in there and Yoda had done that, and they hadn't revealed later that she had the books and Yoda hadn't actually destroyed the final records of the Jedi, then yeah, I could see that point, because that is something that our culture is doing. It's very much trying to do this revisionist history thing where we wipe out the things from the past. If you haven't read the Futurist Manifesto by Filippo Marinetti, everyone should go read it. I'll throw a link in the show notes. But I don't really think that's what this film was doing. I feel like the film...
I didn't catch that part at the end with the books that you see, but I'll definitely have to rewatch it to see it. But that seems like you even said a couple seconds, so it's like...
Yeah, it was very brief. It was one of those things where if you weren't paying attention or if you were looking away, you might have missed it.
Sure.
But I feel like the movie was trying to convey a message. It was trying to tell a story about the next generation of heroes that are coming of age and coming to terms with who they are, and recognizing, or having to recognize, that they don't have the ability on their own. They need to be taught. They need to be trained. They need to grow and mature. while at the same time helping the older generation to realize that it's their time to start stepping aside as they're moving into this newer generation of this war.
Right. But here's
As
what
far as
changed.
hold on one second. So as far as the whole women in leadership roles thing, I did notice that as well. Um,
And I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that's it is what it is, right? I'm not complaining about it.
right now, and I mean honestly, that's not really out of step with the original Star Wars universe either. Like for instance, in the original ones, the leader of the rebellion was Mon Mothma, who became the leader of the New Republic, and in the original canon, which is no longer in canon. But
Right.
and
But then you
Leia
have like
was
General Han Solo, you have, Luke is
yeah,
the Jedi Master.
right. There was a good blend, and Lando Calrissian and
Exactly.
General
So you have like a balance of it. In this case, the rebels are completely led by females. And again, I don't have a problem with that. It's just an observation that I made. And then all the bad guys are guys.
right. And I think that I mean, they're obviously trying to empower women, which is fine. I think I think the thing that you're bringing up, I think, is a good point, and I think what it's doing is it's highlighting something that our culture is going through right now, where um, for so long now, our culture and our society has been, especially on the coastal areas and in the media and in entertainment, they've been elevating the status of women, which is good, but they've been doing it at the detriment of the male population. So now you have an entire generation of men who have grown up who've basically been treated as if they're not good enough, they're not smart enough.
Yeah. Second class
And
citizens.
yeah, and that's why there's this, feeling that we're being preached to in a movie, which I don't really think that we're being preached to. And I feel like it was just a movie that had, maybe it's just me wanting to see this as nothing more than a movie because I like Star Wars so much. I don't want
Of
to
course.
taint it with that. But I thought it was a good movie overall. I'm sure that there probably were some messages in there because it's what Hollywood does. But I'm just choosing to overlook them because honestly, it's like when I watch them, I'm going to read into it what I want to read into it, if that makes sense. I'm going to take away what I want to take away.
Absolutely. And that's what this is about. We're here to be free thinking, not necessarily agree with each other on every point. But what I wanted to bring up earlier about the Force, even in the Jedi, sort of, is the fact that it's changed. So it is kind of a revisionist history, because when you look at the original series or the original Star Wars, and then even the prequels, so the ones that were made circa 2000 that George Lucas made, we have the Jedi Council, kind of making a few flubs to where, like, it enabled the Empire and the Sith to be able to gain more power. But what happens in this, and those are honest mistakes, and even Yoda was like the wisest guy, right? He's the wisest guy, and he's like, we've been blinded. There's been something that's been, essentially put over our eyes, our ability to be able to see the dark parts of the Force adequately. And in this film, you almost have it like, okay, the Jedi were kind of like, idiots. Even Yoda was like, okay, these teachings are like, it's pointless. Did you even read them, Luke? And he's like, well, no. And it's like, okay, so all the old stuff is gone. It's pointless and that's what happens. Okay, again, like, I have to rewatch the film and see what that book thing was with Rey, where she's apparently taking some books or something with her. But I didn't see that. So from my perspective, what they're doing is they're destroying everything that was the Jedi and saying, like, and it's said basically like, it needs to be gone. It needs to be dealt with. And that's the perspective change that I'm talking about, where it really feels like you're trying to be taught something, because we've watched 7 Star Wars films really before this, where it's like the Jedi are these great people. They make mistakes just like everybody else. But now it's like, well, the Jedi kind of like screwed a lot of stuff up, and, their teachings were kind of pointless. So let's burn them and let's get rid of this stuff and basically start over again, which I don't necessarily have a problem with. But what I'm saying is, it's like, it's taking the entire script essentially and essentially like chucking out the window and flipping it on people and going like, look, there's a new sheriff in town, and this is the way it's going to be from now on, and there's no real bad guy, because Kylo Ren's very conflicted, and Snoke is dead. So the only real bad guy is dead apparently, and the good guy, is somebody that doesn't even know how to use the Force or is not even trained, and the bad guy is also largely untrained. He's somewhat trained, but
Right.
so that's the frustrating thing for me. It's like you have no real substance anymore. It's just it's not about the character. It's not necessarily about the character so much as it is about like, let's push this in a social direction that that fits the story we want to tell people. And again, I am reading into it. And you said earlier you think I'm reading too much into it. I mean, I would beg to differ, but I am reading into it. I read into a lot of films because I think film is one of the best ways for people, for society to be able to communicate with each other ideas. And I can refer back to like Russian propaganda films that they put out, and it's all there. Am I saying that this is a propaganda film? No, but what I'm saying is that film is a very great avenue, along with the written word, to be able to communicate ideas and update and change thought processes.
Yeah, no, I know, I agree with that. That's what that's what a lot of cinema does. One of the things you mentioned was it was kind of shying away from the clear good and evil kind of aspect of it, and that's another thing that this movie does do a lot. Is it focuses very much on the gray area. It's kind of a dimming of the light and a brightening of the dark, so it's not quite as like Snoke was the very clear. And if you look at the prequels, like you had the Emperor and Darth Vader, not the prequels, the originals.
Pure evil.
Pure evil, Darth Vader, the Emperor, the galaxy's in darkness. You had the rebels and the Jedi who were resisting them, and they were the light, and they were, good versus evil is very clear. This one, there is very much that the distinction is been blurred, and which, I think that's just naturally where we are as a society, is we're starting to see less and less of the distinction between good and evil, because we live in a very complicated world. But to the note about, the old, the ways of the Jedi screwed things up. We need to get rid of it. And that was very much Luke's mentality. And it was, it's time for the Jedi to end, I think is what his line was. But one thing that as far as reading into it, one thing that I read into it was Luke is old and jaded. I know the feeling very well, but he's all alone. He's gone into exile because of what's happened. He's seen, the evil that is within the heart of Kylo, much the way that someone like me and probably someone like you sees the evil that is within the heart of man. And so, you become jaded by that, and it's easy to turn away from the things that, especially, I don't know if you've ever been friends with someone who, as a Christian, you've been friends with somebody who was a strong believer, who turned away from their faith and started doing things that were very bad, started, treating people horribly. And I had, before I became a Christian, I was friends with this guy who was a very, very strong Christian. And he was actually a very big influence on me before I became a believer. And so once I became a Christian, I was excited to share that with him. And we would talk a lot about spiritual things when I first became a believer. And then something changed, something happened to him. I'm not really sure what happened. He never really talked to me about it. But he went down a very different path. He started using and abusing people. He started doing a lot of things that, he knew better. He knew what was wrong. And, having that experience, I kind of could relate a little bit, probably, to how Luke was feeling, having seen Kylo Ren or, Ben Solo turn to the dark side after all he had done for him. And so you see that mentality within Luke Skywalker. And then you see Rey, who's, she's kind of pushing back on him about that, because she recognizes the need for the light to shine in the darkness. That's kind of the message that I took out of it. And whereas, he was wanting to just, kind of slip into fade away and let the Jedi die the death that he thought they should die, she was like, no, the galaxy needs this. We need to keep this tradition going. And so I saw it a little bit differently, I think, is pretty much the big takeaway in that. But
well, I agree with what you're saying. And I think that you're right, because here, look, with the situation with Luke and Kylo, they intentionally muddied the waters, okay? Because what they did is we saw both perspectives, okay? So we got to see Luke looking like super angry and like crazy, like dark side crazy from Kylo's perspective, and from Luke's perspective, he's seeing it the other way. So now we're kind of like, as an audience, really confused, going like, okay, well, who's being influenced? Who's really being influenced by the dark side here? Now, granted, we're hearing the story from A, Kylo's perspective, and then B, Luke's perspective. So Kylo's a dark Jedi, so he could be lying, but we have to, as an audience, believe what we're seeing with our eyes at this point. And they muddied the waters. I feel like as the audience, from the audience perspective, they confuse you because it's like, okay, well, who's the bad guy here? Because from Kylo says that Luke is the one that caused him to fall, and Luke says Kylo is just started going bad. So who's right here? And I think what that's doing is saying like, okay, well, what's really bad and what's really good? Because Kylo had these good intentions and wanted to do good things, and you're left wondering. And again, that brings it back to like, okay, there's no like real pure evil here, because Kylo, since the beginning of the films, has been this conflicted character. He's always sort of had to like push himself into the dark side and sort of like lean in to sort of like fully grasp it. And he's never really seemed to be able to fully grasp it, even after killing, Han Solo. So it's like, it's frustrating from that perspective, because there's no clear, like you're saying, there's like a lot of these gray areas. There's no like clear cut lines, where with Star Wars, we're so used to seeing that, again, even all the way up until the previous film, The Force Awakens. So I don't know, to sum it all up, this film was pretty frustrating in a lot of ways for me, because it seems like a lot has changed. And I'm not an opponent of change. I think change is good, but when you get away from sort of what's making stories successful, what's made Star Wars a successful franchise, like, for example, the prequels, I can't really go back and watch those anymore because I don't like them. But I didn't like those for different reasons. It's because they weren't able to sort of like flesh out the characters. These characters are very well fleshed out. They're very conflicted. That's great. But they're muddying the waters with the sort of like the difference between good and evil here, and the perspectives of different people. So that's very frustrating to me. And in addition to the whole feeling of like we're being preached at as well. Hopefully with the next film, they don't go this route. It's like, okay, we taught the lessons have been learned. Let's go ahead and make a movie and not try to, pull the wool over anybody's eyes and confuse things.
Yeah. I hope that the next one is, like you said, I hope that it's like we've learned the lessons, and the characters have learned the lessons. They've grown and matured. Hopefully this one's not immediately following the episode 8. Because this one I think was supposed to be just like immediately following episode 7. So I'm hoping that this one will, they'll put a bit of a gap in there, so maybe like a few months or a year or something in between. They can do some, the space scrolling to tell the story of what happened in between. But hopefully they'll give us some distance. That way it'll kind of imply that they've had a chance to kind of learn and grow and regroup and come back to it, because I thought overall it was really good. I really enjoyed the action sequences. There was one scene in particular where the purple hair lady, who was who kind of took over everything when Leia was unconscious, and she flew the cruiser in hyperspace through the Super Star Destroyer, which was awesome. That was like the best scene in the whole movie. But I hope that they'll really kind of go a route where they've learned the lesson. It's time for the epic final confrontation, and that we can just go from there. Because honestly, I don't really think there was a whole lot of subliminal kind of lessons being taught there. But I could be wrong, because I just tend to look at the not that I don't look at the meaning behind movies, but especially when it comes to Star Wars, I tend to just I like to accept the story for what it is. I like to enjoy it for what it is, unless it's just overtly down your throat. Like, we're going to just talk about this, and this is the point you need to take home because you're stupid peasants who don't live in Hollywood.
Well, and sorry for beating a dead horse, but that's the way I feel about it, because It was the same lesson being taught in different points in time. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. You made the wrong choice. You're wrong. This is really how things should be. It's always like a flip. Like, go back and watch it, when you can, and see, like, okay, we've got the characters, some of the main characters making decisions that they believe are right, and then it gets flipped. And that happens multiple times where it gets flipped. Okay, that wasn't the best choice. That wasn't the best choice. Okay, that wasn't the best choice. And in the end, oh, let me think about it. Okay, I made the right choice. That's what I see out from a big perspective, and you have this purple-haired lady again who, sort of like comes in out of nowhere, takes things over, like you said, and you're like, who is this person? And they become a bit of a plot driver, and then all of a sudden you just take him out in the end.
Well, they
and it's
did
like,
that
okay,
though.
you're gone.
They did that in the originals, though. I mean, that's what Admiral Akbar was.
He wasn't a plot driver in the same way, though. I don't think.
What about
She
Lando?
really had a. Go
Lando
ahead.
was brought in kind of on a like he showed up and you're like, oh, this is a friend of Han's, and they kind of give a brief explanation of who he is, but it's very 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 little.
Right, but
And
he's
then
along for the ride. He's not like Lando's along for the ride. He's not calling the shots. Like at that point, you brought him in, and he's a secondary character as he should be. You know what I'm saying? Like we
Well, I
brought
feel
this
like she
character
was
in,
too.
and this is like a character that's kind of driving the plot in several sequences. Like that purple-haired lady is driving the plot. She's calling the shots, and she's not telling people things. And then you're meant to feel angry at her. You're meant to feel frustrated with her because she's not doing those things. And then, when action is taken, and you're like, yeah, that's exactly what should happen. Poe Dameron should have taken over the bridge. He should have done that. Then Leia comes in out of her coma and shoots him and stuns him, and you're like, what just happened? So they got you. That's like, I got you. It's like the I gotcha moment. I had you not liking that purple lady, but you know what? She was right. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, you're like, what the heck?
Well,
tell me you don't agree with that.
Well, I do and I don't. I mean, I think it's just something we're gonna disagree on.
Okay, but how did you feel? Okay, how did you feel about Poe Dameron, like sort of taking things into his own hands, feeling like, okay, this lady's not telling us stuff, and it looks like she's kind of screwing things up because we're running out of gas and we got to do something. So he takes matters into his own hands, makes the best decision that he feels is the right thing, and takes action.
Right.
He's comes in out of her coma and shoots him, stuns him, and then the purple lady's right behind her and like, yep, we were trying to do this all along because this is what it was. And it's like, thank you for that lesson. Thank you for teaching us that.
Right. Well, that's also a military lesson, though. Like, you're not going to go and usurp the authority of your superiors. She was his superior. They brought her in. They explained to her that her role was that she was another admiral within the resistance, and he was supposed to follow orders. Now, I mean, whether it was a man or a woman, I don't think it really would have mattered.
No, I don't think so either.
If we were watching a movie about the Iraq War and a soldier tried to do the same thing, yeah, he'd get arrested and thrown in the brig. It's to me, I didn't really take it the same way you did, which is fine.
History is written from the perspective of the victors. So say he did make the right choice and got everything turned around and everything went hunky-dory, then you're going like, yeah, that chick was totally wrong. She should have been. So it's not as cut and dry as it's made to seem like, oh, he was insubordinate, so he deserved it. You know what I'm saying? Like, mutiny can be a good thing if the captain is driving you into hunger and like starvation and he's not got any direction. And that's the way it seems from the audience perspective. Like I said, that the way they drove the plot forward with her not sharing any information is purposeful. They want you to feel that tension with her, that he feels with her. You're meant to feel like, oh, okay, this is a really bad situation. And then when he takes action, which is the right thing to do for anybody to do, whether it's a man or a woman or whatever, when you feel like that's the right thing to do and take action, why not? And I get what you're saying from a military perspective, but again, even from that perspective, like if your superior officer is basically like for instance, Hitler in World War II is continually telling his troops and sending orders, even when they've completely lost and should be surrendering these battles to the Allies, he's telling his troops, don't give up, just die on the battlefield. That's what he did. And a lot of the Nazi commanders, very loyal to Adolf Hitler, went against his orders and they actually surrendered and spared their men's lives, which I think was the right thing to do. But they were insubordinate. Does that make it wrong?
No, it doesn't make it wrong.
Exactly.
And by the way, pause. Hey, time out. First off, you just brought in Godwin's Law. Congratulations. No matter how long a conversation goes on the internet, inevitably Hitler will be brought up. That's what just happened there. But we're not disagreeing. Like, that was the point of that scene. They wanted you to feel that tension. They wanted you to feel compassion towards the character that you already know, which is fine. It's a plot driver. That's all that was. And I'm not saying that it was wrong. I'm saying that that's how militaries work. That's how militaries function. Was it wrong for him to do that based on the knowledge that he had? No. But I mean, honestly, in that kind of situation, maybe she just was trying not to cause a panic. But I mean, in that kind of situation, I feel like any reasonable military leader would share the details with the people who are thinking they're about to die.
Yeah. Or especially somebody who's getting really frustrated, obviously frustrated. Like, okay, let me share you a few extra details so you can calm the heck down. But
Right.
she didn't
So
do that.
no, she didn't. But maybe she also felt like she didn't need to because he should just shut up and follow orders because he's a man.
Exactly. Exactly. You're just proving my point. You're seriously like everything you're saying is proving my point. Like
I'm trolling you right
this
now.
guy,
Do you
they're
realize that,
keeping
right?
him in check. That's the whole point. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
You realize that all I'm doing is trolling you right now, right? All right. So, here, the final verdicts. Chris didn't like the movie for those reasons. I thought it was a great movie. I really enjoyed it. There were some preachy moments, I guess, but I didn't really take them that way. I'll have to rewatch it. I'll probably take the kids to the Dollar Theater when it comes out there, but I'm not going to go pay those ticket prices again.
You know what I noticed that's funny is that I really like the other two films. I like The Force Awakens and I like the Death Star one. And you didn't really like those. And then I don't like this film, and then you kind of like this film. You're like,
no. I really liked The Force Awakens. I really liked that one. I did not like Rogue One. I've seen it one time. I think it's on Netflix now, so I'll rewatch it just to see. Maybe I'll see something differently this time. But I just really didn't like. I really did not like Rogue One at all. I don't know. It's just there's so much about it that I didn't care for. But I really like this one. I thought it was really good. But I'll rewatch both of them. And
this film was just so social justice warrior-y. It just drove me nuts. And on top of that, the part where they go to that rich planet and all the animals are being killed and they got to like release them and save them. And it's like doing the right thing. I'm just like, barf, barf, barf. Like, really? Did you have to throw that in? Anyway, we got to stop. I got to stop. We got to.
No, yeah. I mean, that part, yeah, that was clear what their motive was there. But, I mean, yeah, we can get into the whole arms dealing thing at a later time. But, final topic for the night, because we want to try and keep it at a reasonable length of time. We're going to talk about the Women's March, women's marches. I think there's a bunch of them. I don't really know. I didn't really follow it too much. But yeah, Chris, I'm going to let you take the lead on this one because I don't want to get going on that one. Go ahead.
You give me this one, I'm like all fired up and stuff. You're like, yeah, go ahead and have this, Chris. Go ahead, get more fired up.
Well, you're already on a roll from all the female authority figures in Star Wars, right?
Oh, so what we're about to hit on is Women's March. Do you think this is a good idea to go into this?
For the record, before we start on this, I want everyone to check on the video they're watching and realize that you're watching a show called Two Wise Guys.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
We have
no prejudice against women. We're both married guys. We both love our wives. We love, to the other gender.
Yeah. Okay. So let me start off. I'll say what I got to say, and then you can take over and say what you want to say about it. I don't know how it went. I didn't go to one. I think there was one in town or one somewhere around here, but I didn't go. I saw a bunch of people I knew who went to various ones around the country that I knew from other times in life who were in different parts of the country who went. I think there was one in Nashville or Knoxville or something that I had a friend who went there, and I saw the pictures on there. And my issue with it is not that it's a women's empowerment march or whatever. It's the language that's used. It's the lack of decency. If you have a cause you're fighting for, I get that, but do you have to be so vitriolic and so hateful towards everyone who's
provocative?
Not provocative? That's a good way to put it. It's like I had the same problem with the things I've seen from a lot of these women's marches as I had with guys like Milo Yiannopoulos. I don't like provocateurs. There's no reason for it. It's not helpful to the discussion. It's not helpful to the country. It's not going to be helpful to your cause. It's just going to cause guys who, frankly, are jerks to come along and be the same way back to you. And that's not helpful for any kind of discourse or discussion. And that's kind of my 2 cents with it. There's a handful of sound bites I've heard from around them, most of which I can't say on here because I don't want to get demonetized, even though we probably already are. But that's kind of my take on it. Chris, you go ahead and say what you want to say about it.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you and everything that you said so far. And here's my take, just a broad take with, this Women's March, but not just this, but with a lot of, social justice type things and protests that are going on. Because I think protests are good when they're done right. And what I believe protests are supposed to do is to bring awareness to certain things, but they're also, in addition to bringing awareness to a cause, they're supposed to bring people together. You're supposed to be sort of inviting to the other side of the argument, people who don't believe in other words, people that don't believe the way that you do. And I don't see that, to be honest with you, with a lot of these things. And it's not just this women's march. There's a lot of things, you know, with you refer to like the NFL protests, you can refer to Black Lives Matter. And when you look at all of those sort of individually, what they're doing is it's almost like segmenting the population. So we have like the women's march, it's all just women, which is great. Fine. You can have women's stuff where it's just women. But we also have like the Black Lives Matter, where and each one of these things is like a club that we can't be a part of, and you can't hope to be unless you can't hope to be a part of that club. And they're trying to make these points to everybody, but they're doing it in such an unattractive way, in such a provocative way. Like you said, there's other people out there. This Milo Yiannopoulos guy, who I dislike as well. I think that there's better ways to go about things. That's all I'm trying to say. Fine, have a women's march, have Black Lives Matter, but let's try to move away from divisive rhetoric. Let's try to move away from things that are dividing people and separating people and drawing instead of drawing lines of division where we're separating and we're saying, okay, this is the difference between me and you. Why can't we find lines of parallel where we're able to sort of converge, or I guess the parallel lines don't converge, but where we're sort of able to come together and find our common ground? That's where true protesting, that's where true activism at its roots is successful, because you're finding common ground. You're able to come together and say, we do agree in this area. We do agree about this stuff. You know, we're all human beings. We all could be better people. We're not perfect. You know, could women use more rights? Sure, of course. Could women use, you know, more power? Sure. But let's try not to put vaginas on our heads and run around yelling, you know, swear words and things that are demeaning to basically, you know, the very people you're trying to send a message to. You know, I mean, if you're trying to convince somebody of an argument, you wouldn't insult them. If you're in a court of law, if a lawyer is in a court of law, have you ever seen a lawyer insult a judge or a jury on purpose? No, because they're trying to convince them of their side of the argument so that they can win the argument and their client can, you know, get the verdict that they want. That's how you do things. You don't try to divide. So that's my issue with it. I don't have an issue with the fact that there's a women's march, you know, just to repeat myself. I don't have an issue with any of the protesting itself. It's the way that it's conducted. It's the manner that people are conducting themselves in doing it. That's the problem.
Well, I think another part of the problem too, and, you know, I think the biggest problem I have is that you mentioned, you know, that it's just women. There are men who've gone to these things too. But it's like, you can only be a part of it if you share the same worldview. And if you don't, you have to be shouted down and you're not allowed to have an opinion. And I mean, like, for instance, if you or I went to one of these marches and we wanted to share the things that we're saying now, like stop being provocative, let's try and find common ground, let's work together. If you have legitimate grievances, let's see what we can do to help make this country better for everyone. But you know, that's not something that would be able to be said now. I remember I listened to a podcast from a guy up in Indiana who went to the march in Indianapolis, and he's the host. I think his name's Chris Bangle. He's the host of the We Are Libertarians podcast. Really good show. If you haven't listened to it, you should check it out. But he went there with a female friend of his who was going to the march. She's a progressive lady, and he went with her. And he was talking about the crowds who were there. They're, you know, very nice, you know, respectful, you know, general crowd. They're just normal Americans, and they're just people who were going to support the cause. But what he noticed was that, you know, he was able to find common ground with the people who were there. He was able to, and granted, this is like in the middle of the country. This isn't like New York or Los Angeles or Washington, which is where kind of the more provocative ones are. But, you know, it's kind of like the Tea Party meetings that I never went to, but I know enough Tea Partiers because I live in the South. You know, they're just decent individuals, and they have their, you know, the things that they think are important. But they're reasonable, and they're willing to talk with you. And, you know, you might agree on some things, you might disagree on other things, but overall, it's just, you're reasonable individuals who are saying these things. But the people who are up on the stage who get the airtime, they are the people who are more on the fringe. They're more on the extremes. And honestly, he was saying that a lot of the people were leaving the Indianapolis march because they were just like, this is getting out of hand. This isn't what I stand for. And so I think that's something else that we ought to remember about it too, is that a lot of these things, if you're not in one of these really big markets like Washington or New York or Los Angeles, that you're not going to be seeing the same kind of things that you would see that, get published in the New York Times and the Washington Post, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the publications are gonna sensationalize everything. So they're gonna take what's sort of the juicy, controversial stuff to and what fits their narrative to share. So yeah, I totally agree with you that on that point. I mean, to your point, everybody that's at the just because somebody's at this march, whether they're male or female, does not necessarily mean they support all of the viewpoints. And I think it's very easy to lump people in when you're seeing, something on the news that's like showing people behaving a certain way. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think we really have to find a way to communicate our ideas and not be so divisive with them. And to be honest with you, and this might be like a little bit of my conspiracy theorist side, if you want to call it that, I feel like it's intentionally done that way to incite people to feel uncomfortable, to feel emotions other than what we would like to feel, which is unity. I grew up around, in a very multicultural setting. I've been around all kinds of people from different, wealth backgrounds, financial backgrounds, to different racial backgrounds, and I never felt any type of anything. Like, I never felt uncomfortable. I never felt like people of certain race, like, let insert stereotype here and they're going to do this. I never felt that ever growing up until more recently, where I feel more like I feel more self-conscious around people of other backgrounds, like as if like I have to behave a certain way, otherwise it's going to be viewed as me being prejudiced. It's sort of like, to say it more clearly, almost like taking preventative measures, like to sort of appease a situation and keep things from going bad before they do, or going negative, I guess. So I never felt that before. And then more recently, in the last year or two, even especially, I just feel like very self-conscious.
Do you think that is more of a media thing, or do you think it has to do with the fact that you live in Los Angeles?
It could be that, but I mean, I've lived here for the past 7 years, so it's hard to say. And I did not feel that way for a while. And like I said, this is more of a recent thing. And like I said, in the last probably year, 2, 3 years, maybe that year or two, not even, and I just feel self-conscious, like, man, like I should be extra nice or whatever, or friendly or something like that to someone who's different than me, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I never felt that way before. I always just treated people as people. I never even had those thought processes running through my mind. So for me, I'm like just really frustrated with myself, first of all, because like, well, why am I having these thoughts? Like, I never thought this way before. And I don't know if other people are feeling that way, but that's just sort of how it is for me. And it's frustrating to feel like that. We're all human beings. We're all in this together. We're all trying to be better people and to find unity for the most part. So it's frustrating to see things where that doesn't appear to be the case, like marches, like these protests and marches and things.
Right. And honestly, I kind of can see that as well. Yeah, it has been over just the last couple of years, now that you mention it. But one thing I'm thinking I might end up doing over the next couple of weeks is, as I have time, is to kind of just start digging into these organizations that are hosting and putting on these events, and trying to follow the paper trail, because I know there was somebody who did it, at least I think it was a group who did it for, like, they were looking at who was funding, like where the like Black Lives Matter was getting their funding from, and another organization, but I can't remember which group it was, that was hosting other rallies. I think it was like some student group or something, that was when they were doing all those protests on campus. And
yeah, it's money backed.
It's money backed, and if I remember correctly, it was going back to the Open Society Project, which I think is a Soros group.
Yeah.
And
you find protest and political unrest type of things. A lot of times his stuff is behind it. Yeah.
Yeah. So ultimately, I guess the big idea here is that it seems like people who go to these things, they want to support a good cause, but those causes are ultimately hijacked by people with ulterior motives. And so always follow the money trail, I guess, is kind of the big idea. But
well, you have to remember that there was clear evidence of a paper trail, basically, even during the election, where they were shipping people in, protesters and people who, who were paid to kind of cause problems. And then that, that in turn, that gets media coverage because it's something that's juicy that's going on. So then we're all seeing that, and as constituents, and we're meant to view that as a problem and see like, okay, well, I have to vote a certain way, I have to feel a certain way. And I think in a lot of ways, those sound bites, those media clips that are getting put out there where somebody's getting treated really badly, of whatever race, of whatever gender, of whatever, it makes you feel bad. You're like, oh my goodness, how could one human being do that, something like that to another human being? And you add all that up just multiple times, and you keep seeing stuff like that, and you're like, and I think that does contribute to some of that uneasy sort of feeling of being self-conscious of yourself, like around other people. And you're just like, how should I behave? What's the acceptable thing? I don't want to step on anybody's toes. I want to be friendly. I don't want to be perceived, in a negative way. And like I said, I didn't really feel that before, maybe a year or two ago. And it's definitely ramped up more recently. And it's a frustrating thing, like I said, for me. And I think it would be for anybody, to have any type of thoughts like that going through your mind. You just want to be you, we should be able to all be ourselves. So that's it for me. I mean, I feel like, we can go ahead and wrap up if you want.
Sure. Well, that's going to be all for episode 12. I want to thank you guys all for tuning in tonight. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, on the iOS podcast app, or on one of your other podcast apps on Android or something else, we would invite you to come over to YouTube, check out the channel. We'll have a link in the show note or in the description of the podcast if you want to check that out as well. And if you wouldn't mind, if you want to support the show, one of the great ways you can do that is to leave a rating and review on the iOS podcast app, or whichever one you're listening to us on. But the iOS one is the big one out there that a lot of other ones pull from. So that helps us get bumped up in the ratings, and just generally adds to the popularity of the show. And so we really appreciate that. You can also follow the show on Facebook and on Twitter. On Twitter, we're at Two Wise Guys Show. Maybe we'll look at doing that free speech friendly social media thing at some point, just because it seems like a better one. If you're interested in getting the show notes, you can head over to this episode's page at twowiseguys.org. I'll have it up in a couple of days. And if you want to follow us individually, you can follow me on Twitter at RebornJumpman. Chris, do you have a Twitter? I can't remember.
I do, but I don't use it.
Okay, so never mind about that. If you want to follow Chris's blog, it's mre.wordpress.com. I'm not sure if he's done anything on that recently. You can follow my website. That's ancientabandon.com. Haven't posted anything on that in a while, but I need to. You can also support us on Patreon if you want to support us financially, help us to upgrade our equipment, because my computer is janky. And that's at patreon.com/2wiseguys. But we'd love to hear your feedback. If you have any questions, comments, rebuttals, if you want to hear us talk about a particular topic on any particular episode, we would love to hear from you. So you can do that through an email. You can send it to twowiseguys.org@gmail.com, or you can just go to the contact page on the website there. You can tweet the show. You can tweet me in directly, and I'll be happy to pass it along to Chris as well. But go ahead. We would invite you to subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching the video feed of this, you can feel free to like, share, and subscribe. We'd really appreciate that. But we'll be back in 2 weeks for the next episode. It'll be episode number 13. And until next time, I've been Dan, and Chris is on the other side of the country there. And until next time, stay woke.
Good night.